Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new Let's Play of Sword of the Stars 2, one of my favorite 4X games to this day. I haven't played this game in many years. About 4 or 5 years ago I recorded my first Let's Play of Sword of the Stars and then the sequel Sword of the Stars 2. It's been a long time. I played in the last couple of months a few sort of test games to remember what I could, and there really isn't much out there in terms of Let's Plays for this game, and I just wanted to play this game again, and I also wanted to record it in sort of as a bit of a tutorial, so that if any of you kind of picked up this game on Steam or were just, looking for an old game to play, this game, doesn't have great documentation, as some of the mechanics can be a little obscure. So hopefully through this series, I'll explain a lot of the mechanics, and should give people who are new to the game a bit of a guidance, and hopefully make the game much more enjoyable. So we're just enjoying the nice randomly generated fight scene during the start credits. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by loading up a test game that I was playing earlier. I want to spend this first episode just talking about some of the main, this is a 4X game, right? So I want to talk about some of the main systems in the game that I think will be easier if we just introduce them before we head into the Let's Play. And then, of course, during the Let's Play, I'll explain everything in more detail as we get to it. But I think it'll help people understand how the game works on a larger scale. So this episode, I want to talk about a few parts of the game. Then I'll record another episode where I'll talk about each of the 7 playable races and sort of what they're all about, and that should help you sort of decide which race you want to play as and sort of understand what's going on. And then in the third episode, we'll start the Let's Play. Okay, so here we've loaded into a test game that I was playing a couple months ago. We're well into the game on like turn 265. I was taking it pretty easy. Normally by this time you could easily have wiped out all of your opponents, but I was just kind of taking it slowly. So, it's a 4X game. We're, taking over stars. We're clearly yellow here. Let's talk about the most basic question, right? Which is the economy. In 4X, you need to have an economy, right? Let's take a look here at this glorious screen of information. You earn money and then you spend it, right? So we are making income through our colonies and taxes and from trade. And we'll go into a bit more detail while we're playing the game, but let's summarize briefly. Colony income, the higher your taxes are, obviously the more income you're going to get. The taxable income mainly comes from the civilian population on your planets. So basically, the more planets you colonize, the bigger the size of the planets, then you will have more colony income, right? Once you have the money, trade, by the way, we'll get into in the Let's Play. It's a whole other subject. You spend your money on research. So at the top, we're setting our slider to determine what percentage of our budget we're devoting to research. So the purple area here is for research. And then the rest you can spend on all sorts of things. So there's a setting here about security, which you don't really need to worry about. Just peg it to this thing here. This was not really implemented well in game. It doesn't really do anything. Stimulus, we'll talk about later. For now, not important. And then obviously the rest, we're building ships, building stations and station modules. And we're paying upkeep on our fleet and on our station. And so, the more money you make, then the more ships you can build and the more stations you can have. Another important part in the early game is colony costs. So when you colonize a new planet, it's going to have a pretty high upkeep. So you got to watch out for that in the early game, not to be too ambitious with your colonization. So that's like the basic rundown of the economy, right? Expand, you'll get more money, get your trade going, and then you can spend that money. What do we spend that money on? Obviously, we're going to spend it on part of it on research. So let's take a quick look at our tech tree here. So there's several different trees that represent different parts of knowledge, I guess, of science. I'm not going to talk about the strategy of what techs you should choose, but there are a few concepts that need to be made clear. So first of all, notice that some of these links are sort of full orange, and that just means that you're guaranteed to have access to that technology. In Sword of the Stars 2, every playthrough, which technologies you have access to will not necessarily be the same. However, a certain set of core technologies are always available to every race that during every playthrough. For example, right now, you'll always be able to research this technology called resistance, but this one next to it, lesser glamour, is not a guaranteed research. First, you have to do a feasibility project, which is just like researching a regular technology. And then at the end of that project, your science advisor will tell you you have like a 99% chance of successfully completing the project. So then just go ahead. But it might tell you you have like a 23% chance, right? So let's see, this one, I tried to research telekinesis, do a feasibility study. It told me you have a 23% chance of succeeding. So if I actually tried to research it, what would probably happen is I would spend all the research, then go like over budget, so to speak, keep researching it, and then maybe I spent like twice the total research, and then it would probably still fail. So there are ways that you can still acquire technology that you have failed to do a feasibility project on. That involves having repair and salvage vessels in a system while you're either destroying the planet of another race that has a technology, or while you destroy ships of another race, and those ships are using the technology that you're trying to figure out, right? So every race has different chances of being able to successfully unlock different kinds of technologies. One of the most obvious differences is that some races, for example, are very good at laser weapons, whereas other races prefer ballistic weapons over here, right? So in my first Let's Play, I played as the Hivers, which are very good at ballistic weapons. So on any given playthrough, their percentage chance of successfully doing a feasibility study on any of these kinetic weapons or ballistic weapons is going to be very high, but it's going to be very low for laser weapons. And for other races, it's the exact opposite. So that's an important thing to understand about the tech tree. We'll talk about any other details about technology later. Let's go back to our economy screen. Something I glossed over, but is very important, is this whole idea of taxation here. So you notice that my tax rate is set at 9, almost the maximum. If you do this in your game at the beginning, you're going to fail catastrophically, right? Because a high tax rate is going to have a negative impact on your morale. And if your morale is too low, then planets will revolt, and bad news. So why can I afford to set my tax rate so high? Some technologies will improve morale in general, but mainly it is because of the interaction between morale, taxes, and government. So let's click on this government button here. This is a concept that's a bit hard to grasp for this game in particular. So unlike in other 4X games, you don't like choose what kind of government you want to be running. The actions that you take in the game are going to shift your government, which is this sort of red circle here, either left or right, which kind of corresponds to real life sort of left-wing versus right-wing politics, and sort of up and down on this axis. And up here represents more like authoritarian regimes, whereas the bottom represents more freedom, more free regimes, right? So a great example here we have anarchism, right? Total freedom versus like a military junta, right? And then here we have like socialism on the left versus like mercantilism on the right. So each of these governments will, as you can see on the top right, is listing some of the effects of the government. The main difference is that governments here on the left will allow you to raise taxes higher, whereas the governments on the right are going to favor a lot of generating income through trade. There are a lot of details about what actions you can take and how they influence the government, and what being in a certain government will affect in terms of the morale in your empire. I'm not going to go into all the details right now, but I will mention that you can find all this information in the XML files in the game folder, wherever your game is installed. There's a file called gov effects, I think, and morale effects, if I remember correctly. And so all of the details can be found there. We'll touch back on this when we actually play our game in terms of what actions you should be taking to steer your government in the direction that you want it to go. So that's an important point to realize about this game, right? How your government will reflect the actions that you take, and so you can take actions that will steer it in the direction that you want it to go. Okay, the last thing that I want to touch on in this first episode is I want to give you a taste of, ship design, right? So the great part about this game, I think, is the combat system and the interaction between the tons of choices you have on the tech tree, how you incorporate those choices into your ship design, and then how that plays out, right, in the game. So we're at a fairly advanced stage, so we have a lot of options here in ship design, but I wanted to just give you a brief overview. So this game we're playing as Soul Force. Every game has different ships, turret layouts, if you will, and the ships all have different stats between the different races. So I said every game, I mean every race has different layouts for their ships. But generally, every race has cruisers, then dreadnoughts, which are like 3 times bigger, and then finally there's a Leviathan, which is sort of maybe even 3 times bigger than that. And there are other designs that we won't worry about for now. But if we take a look at a cruiser, there are 3 sections that we can customize on each ship. The engine section, which at the beginning you won't have much choice, but later you can unlock antimatter, which makes your ship faster. The central section here is the most important choice. It determines what the role of your ship will be. So armor is like your basic fighting cruiser ship, right? But there are many, many options. A lot of these are different kinds of fighting ships, right? So an armor cruiser has, for the humans, has this large turret, which allows you to equip, I don't know, like a big laser gun here, right? However, there are other types of designs, and we'll take a look at some of the designs that I've made on the side. This command section adds certain special capabilities to your ship. Sometimes it's just extra weapon turrets. Sometimes it's special kinds of shielding. So there are a lot of extra choices to make in the command section. Let's take a look at some of the designs that I was using in this game. So let's see, we have so here the SFS Bolzano is a battle rider carrier. So this ship is designed to carry several smaller attack craft, and I think that this ship was designed to track down ships from other races that were too fast for me to catch up to. So it's got a kinetic missile here loaded in the front, which doesn't do damage, just kind of knocks ships around to slow them down. And then the battle riders are very quick, and so you can dispatch a whole swarm of them to go and catch up to ships that are running away from you. So that was the idea for this craft. Let's see, the Saratoga here's another good example. So this uses the barrage section, which has a lot of sort of long-range weaponry. We've got sort of forward-facing torpedoes. These are sort of almost unguided torpedoes. We've got forward-facing, very powerful laser beams, and very long-range missiles, like cruise missiles almost. So this is a longer-range cruiser, and the front is a deflector. So why don't we take a look here in the weapons test? You can see what it looks like. this ship has a deflector which is designed to nullify kinetic weapons. So I was fighting against a race that used a lot of kinetic weapons. So I designed these ships specifically to combat that threat, right? And here we can take a look at its firing capabilities. So those are the forward-mounted lasers. It just shot those 2 cruise missiles. Actually, I think these were special missiles that actually have a laser beam in them. You just saw them shoot up and then shoot the laser there. But yeah, for example, if the target was on the side, then these forward-mounted laser cannons do nothing. Only a few of the side-mounted turrets can actually do anything, right? Why don't we take a look at a dreadnought? Let's see. Here's a good example. So again, dreadnoughts, you can also customize the 3 sections. This dreadnought is a command and control ship, so most of it's got reduced firepower because a lot of the hardware is designed to be the headquarters of your fleet. So let's take a look at some of these numbers on the side. When you're designing your ships, you have to keep a few things in mind. So all ships have supply, energy, and crew. Supply is mainly used up by kinetic weapons and missiles. If you do not have enough supply, a few things will happen. First of all, if I remember correctly, I believe the rate of fire of your kinetic weapons will be diminished, but practically the most significant problem is that your ship can't go very far, right? This endurance here is determined by how much extra supply you have. So especially in the early game, like, you need your ships to have endurance, otherwise they can only go on missions in a very short radius. So supply is very important. Energy is taken up by your energy weapons. It's fairly simple. You want to have more energy capacity than your weapons use. And finally, crew is just as important. All of your weapon turrets and other things that you put on your ship are going to require crew. You need to make sure you have enough of it. You can augment supply and crew and energy with modules. So for example, here I've got some extra supply modules that I've tacked onto the ship. Modules can also be more practical. So here I've added a few point defense turrets as a module. And there are many like Psi abilities that can be added. Psi in this game is kind of like whatever, space sci-fi magic, if you will. So there's a lot of things you can do with modules, but sometimes you just need extra batteries, basically. Finally, let's take a look down here at the speed of the ship. Faster than light speed is just a consequence of the technology level that you're using. You won't be able to control that much, but the top speed and turning speed will vary based on what kinds of mission sections you choose, and so will some of the base like crew and energy and supply ratings. So that is something to keep in mind. You know, your race might have sort of average speed ships, but some of your designs are going to be faster than others, and that's definitely something to keep in mind. Each section has different sort of survivability, right? Armor ratings and structure ratings. And on each section, you can choose what kind of extra armor plating you want to put on there, if any. It will make the ship more expensive to produce, but, you know, it will be tougher, right? The engine section also has a few extra, usually sort of extra energy output kind of choices that you can make here. So in our Let's Play, we're obviously going to be making a lot of design choices as we go along, but I wanted to give you a brief overview of all of the depth of the choices you have, and all of the things that you need to keep in mind when you're designing your first ships. Okay, so that was just a very quick look at some of the things you're going to need to keep in mind as we play this game, right? We have our overall economy, which, you know, like all 4X games, take over more planets, and you have more economy. We have the trade system, which I haven't talked about yet, but we'll get into when we play the Let's Play itself. We have the tech system, the science system, which is pretty straightforward, except that you have to remember that you need to unlock some technologies, and you might not be able to unlock all technologies during your playthrough. We have the morale and government system, where different governments will affect what you're able to do in terms of taxation, and also will give you bonuses to also, research or income, all sorts of different bonuses. And finally, we put all that together to design cool ships, which we use to take over more planets. So that's it for our brief overview. I want to mention a few other quick things before we head on and talk about the races. So I mentioned there are some XML files, and you should take a look at those if you want to get a really deeper understanding of how the government system works, for example, and how the morale system works, just because it will list, and you can see very clearly numerically, what all the advantages and disadvantages are for all of those actions. Another resource is, there is a wiki, which is kind of old, but still accessible. If you just Google, SOTS2 wiki. The wiki is useful for a few things. First of all, it kind of has like a tech tree on the wiki. So it can help you figure out, for example, what technology do you need to have in order to unlock a certain ship section, right? Or a certain weapon. Or different technologies. There are some technologies that have dependencies in other trees, which are not visually represented here. So that's useful. It will also give you the percent chance based on race of each technology being available in your playthrough, right? So I forget, but maybe for humans, detonating fusion torpedoes have I don't know, I'm just making this up, but maybe it's 70%. But maybe for the Morigi, it's 90% because they're really good at torpedoes, right? I'm making those numbers up, but you can find all that information on the wiki. Another very useful thing that's on the wiki is the damage profiles of the weapons. So let's go back to our design here, just to show you what I'm talking about. Here, let's take this Dreadnought for a spin. So, this is a representation of the armor of my ship. I'm going to shoot a bunch of missiles, okay? When a weapon strikes the ship, and so here I have some point defense, but some of these missiles are going to get through. Probably a lot. All right, so a few missiles got through. Here you can see at the top, it looks like only one missile impact, or maybe two side by side, 2 missile impacts made it through. Each weapon in the game has like a profile, and some weapons have more of a straight linear profile, and those are good. They're basically like armor piercing, if you will, whereas others have a much more blunt, wide damage profile. The 2 thick blue layers on this ship means that because of the technology and armor plating that I've put on it, the first 2 layers of any shape will be erased, right? So probably the missiles that got shot might have a profile that is roughly circular like this, and I've just erased the first 2 layers. So if you're curious for each weapon what kind of damage profile it has, you can find all of that on the wiki as well. And so that's obviously a very significant factor in choosing which weapons you're going to use. Do you need to have weapons that are narrow but pierce more deeply? Or is your target less heavily armored, in which case you can afford to use sort of broad weapons that are just going to take out huge swaths of armor with each shot? Okay, so that was the last thing I wanted to mention. So there's a wiki, you can go check it out. It has a lot of that information, and the XML files in the game folder are also another great source of information. So that's all for this first episode. I hope you're excited. I'm excited to be playing this game again after so many years, and I hope you will enjoy the Let's Play. I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Take care.